there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 3 in the Weeds, Episode 3, the 5 types of selling and which one is the only one that really truly helps your buyer in conversion in the process. My name is Becc. I'm going to be your guide for today's session. If you do me a favor, if you'd go to flipthescript.co, on the left-hand side, if you would click the free sales training hub, click Season 3 underneath that, and then Episode 3, and you can download the deck for free. All you have to do is put in is your email. And once you've done that, you can have it at each step of the way. Let's go ahead and jump on into the content. So this is the agenda. Looks pretty simple, but this is going to be a very, very meaty session. So I'd highly encourage you to get the deck if you haven't already. But first, we're going to go into selling type number 1 with litmus tests on how you would know if you're selling according to this selling style. Same thing for number 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then last, we're going to go into which one helps your buyer, actually helps your buyer, and how would you execute it. So why don't we just go ahead and jump in here. So the first selling type with litmus tests is product-centric selling. So this is a manner of selling, it's pretty simple, whereby you're trying to convince your buyer to buy your products based on the quality of your products. So you're essentially, during the selling time, you're talking all about your products, and that's supposed to convince your buyer to want to buy your products more. So here's a number of different litmus tests. I'm going to read these to you because obviously these are probably pretty small on the screen. But the first litmus test of that you are product-centric selling, and this is probably where most people started within selling. Within selling sales history, this is where most people started, is you describe your products on a first call with the buyer. So when you have your first call, most of that time is taken up with a few questions to them and then talking a lot about your products. The second litmus test that you're selling according to this, and again, I'm not going to go into which one's good or bad, just litmus tests that you're selling according to this one. Number 2 is the vast majority of your demo, when you do demo your products, of like after discovery, when you're talking about your products or when you're talking to the buyer about the offering, most of the conversation is based on the products. And when you're describing those products, you have no tie essentially to what the person's trying to accomplish. So for instance, if you can't say, so like you mentioned in our first call, when you were talking about solving blank, this product in specific would help you do that. If you can't do that, then essentially you're product-centric selling. So it's all about the products. The products are on the marquee here. The fourth one here is when you're describing your products, you don't know the impacts of what will happen to the prospect if they continue to do business as is and they don't solve whatever they're trying to solve. So number 1, you have no tie to what they're trying to accomplish. Number 2, you have no tie to what those products should be able to solve. And number 3, you have no idea what will happen to them if they don't solve that problem in this type of selling. The next one, when you're describing your products, you don't know what the problem is. Next one, your buyer persona cards. And this is a good litmus test from marketing. When you read through your buyer persona, Rolodex, so essentially usually people have anywhere from 4 to 12 buyer personas. All of the buyer persona cards are talking a little bit about the buyer and then mostly about your products. So that's a good litmus test that, again, you are encouraged to, and you are currently product-centric selling. You have a sales, every time you have a sales training, it's typically going to be on a product release. So a lot of times companies, they release a new product, and of course they do a sales training. Why? Because their reps are product-centric selling. So they need to know more about the product. So the number one thing that I'd say I hear when I ask people, what would help you sell more effectively? Without bar none, they'll always come back with, I need more product knowledge. I need to know my product more. The second to last litmus test is when you're competitively selling against, your competitors. You know that one of your competitors is in the deal, that all the products that you're pitching to the person is always the same. So like every single sales conversation with you and a buyer is essentially the same. And when you're describing how you differ from your competitors, it's consistently the same things that you're mentioning. Then that is going to be a hallmark that you are product-centric selling. And then the last one, and this is just kind of an anecdotal one, is if you don't know, let's say you have anywhere from, 3 to 12 buyer personas in terms of their discipline of role. If you don't know what they're measured on, you don't know their leading indicators, you don't know their lagging indicators, then I would say it's a very, very big sign to you that if you don't know what someone's metricked on, you have no other option than to talk about your product. So any type of other selling is going to be more difficult because you'll have to know more about your buyer. In this case scenario, the only thing that you'd have to know is the ins and outs of your product. So this type of selling, just to kind of give it an analogy, so to speak, is as if a patient walked into a doctor's office, and essentially the patient walks in, the doctor asks no questions, and starts describing 5 different medications at the goal to convince the patient to buy those medications more. That is product-centric selling. So essentially they're asking no questions to the patient, and you're already hearing some heat get in my voice. They're asking no questions to the patient, and they're trying to describe these 5 different medications or products in an advantageous way to convince the patient to want to buy these medications more. So that is product-centric selling. The second type of selling, and again, in the end, we're going to go into the most advantageous one and how you can execute it for anyone who's cringing. But the selling type number 2 with litmus tests, selling type number 2, drumroll, is feature-centric selling. So this is very similar to product-centric selling, but essentially you're trying to convince your buyer to buy based on the features of your products as opposed to the product themselves and what use case they can use those different features in. So very similar, just a more granular feel. So typically I'll see product-centric selling within companies that are enterprise when they have like 85 products. So for instance, I've worked with 2 companies this year that had anywhere from 75 to 160 different products. Very heavy product-centric selling in those or the temptation to product-centric sell because they have so many products that they can't cover even the features. Feature-centric selling is going to be typically where people niche in if they are a mid-market company, let's say, or they have more limited product offerings. So it's essentially the same type of feel that they are trying to convince the buyer to buy based on the features of the different products that they have. So let's go into some litmus tests. Very similar to the first pool. You describe basically features on your first call as opposed to a product. The vast majority of your demo is based on individual features. When you're describing features, you have no tie to what they're trying to accomplish, what problem they're trying to solve, what they're trying to avoid, or what will incur to them, impact will happen to them if they don't solve for it. Your buyer persona cards are mostly on product features. So I see this a lot within SMB and mid-market companies that you go to the buyer persona battle cards and what they're being fed is like, hey, here's a marketer, for instance, and here are the 3 products or features that they'll want to take advantage of within the product, and here's the upside. You're competitively feature pitching based on features, and then you also don't know what your buyer is metriced on. So feature-centric selling is as if the patient comes in, to the doctor's office. The doctor again asks 0 questions to the patient and then is starting to describe 5 different medications and the features of those medications of how long it will last and how it will make you feel, et cetera, as a way to convince the patient to want to buy that medication more. So that's feature-centric selling, and it's selling type number 2. The third type of selling is going to be benefit selling. So benefit selling is a manner of selling where you're essentially trying to convince your buyer to buy based on the supposed benefits of using this product. So typically within the industry, what's interesting is you'll hear people say they by and large, they know that product, feature, and benefit-centric selling aren't great. They say like, oh, well, you should never feature dump or you should never benefit dump. But by and large, when I see selling, account executives or full cycle AEs or people who are taking it to close, bar none, the most that I see is feature-centric selling. And then I'd say the second biggest culprit is going to be benefit-centric selling, what I see the most often on the floor. So people, I feel like this can be a culprit because they are benefit-centric selling, they don't even know it. So this is a manner whereby essentially you're describing to the person the benefits of using a certain product or a certain amount of features within that product, of the benefits that they will incur. So this is the same type scenario. Patient comes into the doctor's office, doctor asks no questions, and then just starts talking about different benefits of the 5 medications that they have available to try to get the buyer to buy. So a great example of this would be like, it's going to help you lose weight, or it's going to help you sleep more deeply, or, save time doing X, Y, and Z. But essentially, it's the benefits of taking a certain medication or using a certain product. So very similar to the last subset, buyer persona cards are based on benefits. When you're describing the potential benefits, you have no idea what they're trying to accomplish, what problems they're trying to solve, what happens to them if they don't. I'd say a good litmus test here is if your value props, according to what you do, sound something like more time, less money, save time, ineffective process. This is benefits. These are benefits. You save time, you save money. And this is where I see people niching in the most. They're like, if you do this, then you will get, more time, you'll lose weight, it's more effective, et cetera, et cetera. But these are generic benefits or upsides to using a product that you will see. So when you're competitively pitching, it's the same thing. You are pitching based on the benefits that your prospect would see. And these benefits are staying the same from buyer to buyer. So whenever you're competitively pitching, if you competitively pitch, meaning you're going up against a certain competitor in 5 different meetings, and if when they ask you how you differ, if it's the same pitch in each one of these 5 or the same soft pedal type of pitch, then this hallmarks to you that you are benefit-centric selling. You're either product-centric selling, feature-centric selling, or benefit-centric selling. And also the last one, of course, is you don't know what your buyer's metriced on. So again, if you don't know what your buyer's even metriced on, meaning if I didn't know that sales reps were marked on close one ACV, or I didn't know that SDRs were marked on booked meetings, I'd probably have a lot of very difficult time driving any value, understanding their world, uncovering any problems for them, because I don't even know the very, very basics. So this would be as if, I wanted to pretend to be a expert, let's say, on the Dallas-Fort Worth area if I had never been to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So the beginning would be, you would know what they're metriced on. So again, this is selling type number 3. And it's save time, save money, more time, less effective, less pain, less headache, et cetera. But this is according to the benefits that you would see if you used a certain product. The 4th type of selling, and now we're getting a little meatier. And this, before I go into this type of selling, from my perspective, is the most dangerous type of selling. And the reason why is most people believe in the industry, we know that product-centric selling's bad, feature-centric selling's bad, benefit-centric selling bad. Most people don't know they're doing it while they're doing it, at least in my experience. But this next type of selling is viewed as very positive. And that's why it's the most damaging to me, this is going to be pain-centric selling. So pain-centric selling is my heart's beating fast. This is going to be where you're still trying to convince your buyer to buy, but you're trying to convince them by way of uncovering pain that they're running into, the impacts of that pain in the current state, and the gravity of that pain. And you're using all of that information to emotionally manipulate the buyer into feeling like they should buy your product more. So this is seen as very progressive within selling. So for hundreds of years, thousands of years, we were doing product, feature, benefit, and then we pivoted to pain at about the 60s. And this was a piece of the puzzle. I want to be respectful here, is a piece of the puzzle. but this is not the whole bag from my perspective. So pain-centric, essentially, again, is you're trying to uncover if they're running into pain, what the level of that pain is, and what are the impacts or what is it affecting. So a great example would be, this is the patient comes into the doctor's office and the doctor asks questions this time. Way to go, doc. But he or she asks questions about pain only. What hurts? My arm hurts. How long has it been hurting? It's been hurting for 3 weeks. What is the impact of you not being able to use your arm? Well, when I go home, I can't pick up my son or daughter, because my arm hurts too bad. What's the emotional impact of that? Well, now they're starting to feel distance between me and them because I can't pick up my son or daughter, or my headache hurts and so I can't interact with them or play with them. And then they stop there because they want to use that information to manipulate the buyer into realizing the impact of that. And so they're more likely then they go into the 5 different medications that they can take, of like, these 5 medications will help your head feel better. And they start describing the features and benefits. So again, they ask questions about pain only, and then they start describing these medications to try to get the buyer to feel like they should buy these medications more because they realize the current impact of the pain that they're having. So this type of selling, and we're going to go into the litmus test in a second, but when pain questions are always going to be necessary, you have to understand why the buyer's there. Like, what pain are they running into that they've self-noticed? But there's one thing that you don't know if you ask pain questions. There's one major thing, and I want you to think about it. What do you not know? You know that they have pain. You know how long it's been going on. You know what it's impacting at home. But there's one major thing that you do not know at this point if you only pain sell. So I want to see if you can guess it. Write it down on your paper, and write it down on your paper what you think it is. But the main thing that you do not know is why. What's causing that pain? And that's where you're going to drive the most value for your buyer, is uncovering what is causing the pain that they're trying to alleviate so that you can effectively solve for it. So this type of selling, here are the litmus tests. They're different from the last few slides quite a bit. So you ask pain questions standalone, meaning you're after uncovering if they have pain and what the gravity of that pain is, but that's where your questions stop. You want to know that they have pain so that you're more likely to sell. You understand their pain, but you don't know the cause of it. You don't know why it's occurring. You know their head hurts and you're like, great, awesome, their head hurts so I can sell them this, but you don't know what's causing that pain. A third litmus test is you use techniques to try to get them to show you this pain. So you're addicted to sales webinars on, which I have been in the past, on what technique do I use on my buyer so I can get them to share me more pain. So a lot around webinars around like being human or having empathy so I can get this person to just open up enough to me to where they can share their pain because I know I can leverage that in the sales cycle. Another litmus test, when your buyer is answering a question, you asked a question, and when they're answering it, you're thinking of your next question. Big litmus test that you're leading them somewhere. So you're asking pain-centric questions, Your questions are leading questions or stacking questions, meaning you're trying to get them to opt in along the way to lead them to the certain destiny. And the destiny is that they buy your product. But essentially how you're doing that is in a pain-centric manner. So if you're thinking, you ask a question, they're answering, and your memory is just swirling, your mind is just swirling with, oh my gosh, this person's going to buy. What question should I ask them next to get them to the next piece? How can I get them to realize that they need X? Great hallmark that you're pain-centric selling. You've had a hard time putting competitive differences together. This is a big hallmark. So I see a lot of orgs, specifically within B2B SaaS, they can't tell you how they competitively differentiate. If you're like, blank versus blank, you're like, how do you differentiate against X? And they can't tell you. And the reason they can't tell you is because they justify to themselves that they're not product, feature, and benefit-centric selling, which they're correct in doing so. So they can't give you this list of features, because they don't know who the buyer is, but they're doing something worse. They're pain-centric selling. So if you have a hard time putting competitive differences together, good hallmark that you are pain-centric selling. You don't know what your buyer's metriced on, still in pain-centric selling. You still don't know their world. You don't know common challenges and struggles that your buyer runs into. So if I'm selling into a VP of sales, I know that they're running into what they're hallmarked on is close one ACV. So I should know a number of different common struggles or challenges for this buyer. So for instance, within pipeline, some of the struggles of my buyers are they don't know the talk tracks at work. They don't know the emails to send to get high response rates. They have, sub 1% response rates to their prospecting emails. They don't know how to get prospects with the right information, or they struggle getting the right information with the right prospect, with the right title at a right identified account into their sales engagement instance, so that they can prospect effectively, because it's super hard to get a clean list. The leads that come over from marketing, by and large, aren't people that we want to talk to. So that's a list of common challenges that they're running into. For sellers, it's their prospects are ghosting them. They have really long sales cycles. So you should know a litany of common problems or struggles for each buyer that you sell into. And then you ask questions after the pain questions on, has it worked? So you'll ask of like, okay, what's hurting? My arm's been hurting. How long's it been hurting? It's been hurting for 3 weeks. What are the impacts whenever you go home? Well, I can't pick Timmy up. Well, what's the impact of that? Well, we have emotional gap between me and Timmy. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, have you tried to do anything about that? And then then they're like, yeah, well, I tried to, do this exercise. Did that work? No, that didn't work. And you're trying to stack these questions up in a way that your buyer buys. That's why it's so dangerous, is you don't know why. And this is it's sneakier because it's still emotionally manipulating your buyer to believing they need a product without knowing that they need a product and not having the expertise on if they need the product. So this is pain-centric. You don't challenge self-diagnosis. This is the last one. So when someone comes in, this is a very, very big one. Someone comes in on an inbound line and they say, I need blank. If you're a pain-centric seller, you're going to go, great. What pain are you running into? And you're not going to challenge the self-diagnosis. The problem here is for this season, I went to a multitude of different doctor's appointments, even though I didn't need one. And I asked them question after question after question after question after question. And I compared it to my own experience when people are coming into me saying they need sales training for cold calling training. And I asked the doctors, by and large, when people have self-diagnosed what they need, how often are they correct? They said 90 to 95% of the time, they are wrong. So if you're pain-centric selling, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they're wrong. Because why? You just need to know that they have pain and that you can sell them something based on it. So the problem with this is your buyer buys and their problem isn't solved. Because you gave them this thing they said they needed. And to be fair, challenging your buyer, on whether this is correct or not, it's the harder for you in the moment, is what we think. But actually long term, even if you just want to sell more, you need to challenge. You need to challenge this and wonder if this is the correct product that they need. So the last type of selling that we're going to go into is problem-centric selling. So problem-centric selling is very different from pain-centric selling. It's essentially what you're trying to do in this type of selling. You're trying to identify problems that your buyer is unaware of, often cases, diagnosing the cause of problems that they are aware of, that they came to you with, and you're trying to prognose or forecast a problem that they will likely run into if it's not solved that they're unaware of. You are using pain data as a part of this. Why are you here today? Why does your arm hurt? But then you are transitioning. The doctor, you'll typically see patient comes into the office. Doctor starts asking some pain questions. What's hurting? How long has it been hurting? They usually won't ask what's the impact at home. They'll say, what's been hurting? How long has it been hurting? And then they'll start to ask a multitude of questions that look irrelevant to the patient, but are helping the doctor diagnose. So have you found that your eyes are, and they're usually not pain-based questions, have you found that your eyes are a little bit more dry recently? Yeah. Okay. Have you been sleeping more on average? Yes, I have. Have you seen decreased appetite? Yes, I have. None of these are pain-centric, but these are questions that your doctor is asking to help understand what's causing the arm to hurt or what's causing the head to hurt so that I can help my buyer by way of prescribing something. So when you are mapping, once you've uncovered these problems and uncovered the root causes of the problems that they're running into, you're mapping your products or features or the deployment or the plan, etc., against the problem that they're trying to solve. So the very, very interesting thing about problem-centric selling is we buy as buyers, bar none, to solve a problem. We sell as sellers, bar none, to not uncover problems. And then we're wondering, what words can we use? So this is the culprit from my perspective. A big culprit is having our buyers back by understanding what problems they're trying to solve. So here's some good litmus tests that you're doing problem-centric selling. I've very rarely seen it done effectively, especially percentage-wise that they're doing it most of the time. You know what your buyers are metriced on. This is the first marker. You know the common challenges that they run into. You don't rely on techniques, meaning you aren't thinking about what are the ways that I can say this in a way to get the person to respond in this type of way. Your questions are understanding-based. So I would ask myself when I'm asking a question to my prospect, whether that's in a discovery or a demo or whether I'm on a cold call, am I asking this question because I want to accuse someone, blame someone, prove an agenda, or lead them down a certain path? Or am I asking this question because I genuinely want to understand the information? So again, if you're asking questions and then you're lost in thought, a train of thought trying to think of the next question, it's not problem-centric selling. And also, if you, ask someone a question and right after they respond, you can't recant to them what they said, also a good marker that you're not problem-centric selling. So problem-centric selling is predicated on how well do you understand your buyer at large, and then how well do you understand that the prospective buyer within the room. You simply can't give competitive differences until you are talking to the person within discovery. So in this case scenario, I can't tell you how I compete with other trainers. And the reason being, if I don't know what problem you're trying to solve, then I don't know hypothetically what offering I would be offering you. So how I compare in terms of, cold email to other trainers versus cold call to other trainers versus objection handling to other trainers versus methodology to other trainers, they're all going to be different. And I couldn't answer those questions unless I knew what I was trying to solve for. So you can't give competitive differences until after discovery. You're unable to do a demo or talk about your product. And again, these are all very positives. You're unable to do discovery and talk about your product on the same call. Very rarely have I seen a seller not be able to do this, and it's a very good sign. You should not be able to do in-depth discovery and talk about you on the same first call. So the first call should just be about getting to know them and discovering things about them and the problems that you're trying to solve. Every call is different from the next. No two buyers should be the same. Your discovery lasts at minimum 45 minutes. Sometimes it can even last longer in my experience. You need your buyer to return to the next call with some data points. This is also a good hallmark that you're problem-centric selling, is if you've talked about some things and then you've asked some questions that you need to know the answer to. So they need to bring some things back to the next call. You can't offer a solution until you get the data point. So a great example is I ask people for some email templates or what's the conversion percentage into a response rate, or into having a first discovery call with the AE. How many of those calls go to be qualified? What is the qualified criteria? And if they can't answer all those questions, which, typically people can't, they're not a data warehouse in their head, then I ask them to go gather those data points. The reality is I can't pitch to them what I think the plan should be until I hear those data points. So you can't offer a solution until you get them. You don't often get objections. It's a great litmus test. If you're problem-centric selling, your buyers can feel it. They can feel that you're after helping them by way of uncovering information. So you typically, when I started problem-centric selling, my objections decreased through the floor because people knew when I was asking questions, at least from my perspective, that I was asking those questions to understand the information to help them, not to lead them somewhere. So objections come up. The root of the term objections is your buyer, you are on the offensive to try to close them. Your buyer notices it and they throw up an object in your way to slow you down. Not the right person, not interested, send me an email. In a meeting, I took this call because I thought of somebody else. Walking into a meeting and it's 11:17 a.m., whatever. What time does your meeting start? 11:19? It's an objection. And the reason they're throwing that objection is they're trying to slow you down. And what they're trying to slow you down from doing is trying to sell them. They can feel it. They're like, this person is trying to push a product on me. So if you don't get objections very often, it's a great marker that you are problem-centric selling. You don't feel gross while you're selling. This was the first type of selling that I didn't feel icky anymore. So I hear a lot of people say, like, how do I not feel so salesy? And I'm like, well, if you're selling, you're going to feel salesy. You can pretend to be as human as you want. You can pretend to have empathy or care about them or whatever. But if your goal is to sell, if your goal is to push more product strictly upon them, regardless of whether that's, being pain related, etc., then you're going to feel gross about it, in the core of you. So once I transitioned onto problem-centric selling, all of that went away. All of that went away because I knew the problem that I was trying to solve. And you aren't worried about building rapport or credibility. You aren't worried about, things like that in the first meeting because how you're building rapport is natural. You are bringing yourself back to the side of the buyer. So the term rapport is rooted, it's a French term actually is the origin, and it means to be brought back. So we were at odds with our buyer beforehand because we're trying to sell them crap. And they're just trying to solve their problems. We're trying to sell them at the highest ticket item. They're trying to buy at the lowest ticket price. And rapport is you're being brought back to the side of your buyer, meaning you understand their view and you're trying to help them in a way that you would help yourself if you were buying this type of product. So these are all litmus tests that you're problem-centric selling. So I want to go into which one, I think you can guess by all of my heated rants, which one is the only one that helps your buyer, the only one that you can have your buyers back, and the only one that doesn't feel disgusting, and how to execute it. So which one is the winner? Bada bing, problem-centric selling is the winner in the selling type that I would have as a part of my diet that I would be using within the day-to-day to sell. So what can you help them with? So within problem-centric selling, obviously your goal is to help your buyer by way of understanding their problems so that you can diagnose that problem or the cause of that problem and then prescribe a product of yours to solve that problem, essentially. So the first thing that I would be thinking about within problem-centric selling is how do I help my prospects by uncovering things for them that they don't know. So a number of different reports are reporting back to us that 87% of buyers, whether that's buying a stick of gum or that's buying an enterprise software solution, would rather self-serve. And I understand why. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Because as sellers, all we're doing is describing our products. So for your buyer to find value in your interaction, they have to walk away from the meeting knowing things that they didn't know before the meeting. This is where you can make yourself valuable to someone. Is uncovering things for them that they did not know before they started interacting with you. So I want to go into 3 different buckets of ways that you can help them uncover things that they don't know for all of this. And I want to bring up, let's see if I can bring up his picture. All of this work was based off of the work off Keenan and Gap Selling. So I do think that is worth mentioning. So if you haven't bought the book Gap Selling, I would go and buy it immediately. This is essentially my take on his work. But what he understood, he is the father, so to speak, of problem-centric selling. And what he understood, that pain wasn't good enough. Pain wasn't helping my buyer, and that pain is just, manipulating my buyer based on an emotional response. But he understood that problem-centric selling and that buyers buy based on problem. And if I can solve those problems, then that is how I'm going to help them out. He is the one that came up with this entire methodology. So Gap Selling is a great book to read by him. He goes very in depth there. But this is essentially my take on his work. So I've gotten the chance to collaborate with him quite a bit. So this is my double click or expansion or take on his work. But I do think it's worth mentioning that this all comes as a result of what he essentially taught me. So I want to go into the 3 different ways that you can help your buyer. Number 1, help them by diagnosing. 2, help them by prognosing. And 3, help them by prescribing a solution. So all 3 of these are obviously going to be according to things that they do not know. So in terms of diagnosing, there's 5 different things that you can help them diagnose. Number 1, you can help them. And this grid chart, just so you know, I know that it's nerdy and it's small. It's what you can do, what they know, and what they don't know in this case scenario. So number 1, you can help uncover something for them that's currently harming them that they didn't know is harming them. So what they do know is how their business is performing. What they don't know is that these are signs that they have a condition that's harming them. So the most deadly conditions within the medical profession are ones that are sign-based. And the difference between a symptom and a sign is a symptom is going to be typically pain-based, and the patient notices it. And a sign is going to be an indicator that's not pain-based, that the doctor notices. So the value of sign-based, of understanding conditions your buyer has that they don't know that they have, is because they don't know that they have them, they let them continue hurting them. So a great example of this is, I see again on 6% to the high percentage, 25% of people who request to talk to you about your product are getting to talk to you about your product. That is a sign. If I were to ask a question around like, can you tell me about your process of qualification? When an inbound lead comes in, if they lead with, so we're qualifying them on BANT, I know that to be a sign that they probably are churning users, but they don't know that that's a sign. So the first and most beneficial way to get a hold of any prospect is to say like, hey, I notice that you have this problem based on the research that I've done. So you'll be fighting off the pipeline at this point. So the first thing is uncovering something for them that's harming them that they didn't know about. Second thing is uncovering the cause for a symptom they did know about. So what they do know is that they have a problem or a pain. My arm hurts, so I go into the doctor. This is a typical inbound play, is people are coming to you because they've self-recognized a pain or a problem. So how you can help them, what they don't know is what's causing that problem or that pain that they're experiencing. The third here is correcting a misdiagnosis. for a problem that they haven't want to solve. So again, they can get misdiagnosis from themselves. They could think it's an email problem when it's not an email problem. They could think it's a cold call problem when it's an email problem, but if you are uncovering within the room, they say like, I'm not at quota. And then I say, okay, great. What do you mean? What's the quota? How far are you, there? Can you tell me about the activity metrics? How many calls are you making per day? How many emails are you sending per day? Can you give me a sample? What's the conversion rate? What's the response rate? And if I uncover in the process that they think they have a problem with cold calls, but I know that they have a problem with email instead because I'm the expert in the room, this is where you display expertise. If you don't know what your buyer is metriced on and you don't know what they commonly run into and you don't know how to diagnose, then I'm like, how the hell do you expect to build credibility? So sellers will be like, how do I build trust? I'm like, trust is defined as they trust that you're telling the truth and your ability and your reliability that you can deliver. That's how it's physically Webster defined. So even if I get them to believe that I'm telling them the truth, it doesn't mean that they trust me to solve their problems, that I have that ability. So I would, the third way you can do this and build credibility in the process is correcting a misdiagnosis that they've either self-diagnosed or someone else has given them for the problem that they're trying to solve. The fourth is sharing about an event that just happened that introduces a problem currently. So let's say that a mandate, was lifted let's say a mandate was lifted that beforehand you had to mandatorily buy insurance. And now all of a sudden that mandate was lifted. So people don't have to mandatorily buy insurance. That's an event that happened in the present that now you have to solve for. So telling them about these events and ones that would impact them. And then sharing about an event that causes a negative problem in the present. So a neutral problem is just a problem you're trying to solve for. Think of it like a math problem, whereas solve for y. Whereas a negative problem is going to be one where they're incurring a negative impact in the present. So usually what they're trying to solve for in the negative problem is just that the pain's alleviated. Whereas a neutral problem, they're trying to solve for towards a goal. And if they don't hit that goal, then a negative problem will be introduced. So in both of these case scenarios, what they'll know, so in the correcting a misdiagnosis, they'll know they have a problem and that they've want to solve it and they've tried to solve it. What they don't know is why the solution didn't work. For the event with the neutral problem, they know their current setup, but what they don't know is that this event just occurred, that it introduces a neutral problem in the present, and that there's a potential negative impact from that neutral problem that they don't solve for it. And then in this last case scenario, if there's a negative event or an event that causes a negative problem in the present, then what they know is they suddenly have a problem in the present, but what they don't know is that the event that just happened is what caused it. So again, this is hinged off of helping them by way of information that they didn't know or weren't considering within diagnosis. So this is for diagnosis alone. So the second one I wanted to go into is how do you help your buyers according to prognosis? So prognosis is just a fancy word for forecast, what's going to happen to them. Typically, sellers are going to be all after talking about asking their buyer what the impact of something is if they don't solve for it, which is okay to ask if they know the impact. But again, you're asking your prospect to self-prognose. The reality is they probably don't know, and asking them to answer that question and then anchoring yourself to that answer, very, very negative. So where I see sellers using this the most is they're trying to manipulate the buyer, but how you can prognose is by telling them about an impact that's going to happen that they don't know about. So if I were to go into a doctor, for instance, and then I'm like, my head hurts and it's been hurting for 3 weeks, and then the doctor asks me, well, why? I'd be like, that's what I'm here for, is I don't know. You tell me. That's why I'm paying you $400 is to tell me why and to tell me what's going to happen to me, because that's allegedly your expertise. So within prognosis, the first thing that you can do is make them aware of a tangential problem to if they don't solve their negative problem in the present. So for instance, if there's another impact that will happen beyond what they know will happen to them, let's say that they aren't hitting quota, and the negative impact of that is if they don't hit quota next month, they're going to be fired. So a tangential problem would be one outside of that current problem or impact that they're trying to solve. Also, if you don't hit that quota, not only will one of your reps be let go, but you'll likely see increased churn on the rest of your team because that rep was let go, because they're going to lose motivation. So this is telling them about a tangential impact that will happen outside of the ones that they already know that happen. So again, within selling, we're all about asking them about the impact that they know, but our expertise is not our product. If we were experts in our product, we would be on the product team. Or we would be product engineers, solutions engineers. We need an entire team of sellers who are technical because we're not technical. Where our expertise comes into play is knowing the context of who our buyer is, what they do, the problems they run into, and how can we help them solve that problem for that buyer in specific. So our knowledge and expertise is them, essentially. So what do they know in this case scenario? They know that they have a certain amount of pain presently and that they want to solve for it. What they don't know is that not only will the current pain persist, but another problem will be introduced, or another impact will be introduced if they don't solve for it. The second type is making them aware of a future impact of a neutral problem that they're trying to solve for. Very similar to point number one, but this is, again, a neutral problem. You're trying to solve for something. You don't have a negative impact currently. So the negative impact comes into play if you don't solve for it. So a great example would be, I want to answer these questions on this test, the problems on these tests correctly. If I don't answer them correctly, then the negative impact comes that I got a 60 on my test and I can't play soccer, for instance, because, I'm failing chemistry. Not that that actually happened to me, but whatever. Anywho, what they do know is that they have a metric or a goal in this case scenario that they're trying to solve for. What they don't know is there's an additional impact that will happen to them if they don't solve for this metric. So a great example would be, we have an event that's happening in the future. Maybe we're going to IPO, and they're like, hey, we want to solve for our teams to be better sellers so that when we do IPO, that our numbers are up even higher so we don't see stockholders not want to invest because of these numbers when we flush out to public. That was the impact that they know of. If you're making them aware of another impact that would happen if they don't increase their numbers, that's where you're displaying expertise. This third one, telling them about an event that will happen in the future so they can plan accordingly in the present. This is a big one. Any mandates that are going to come into place for their buyer persona, any kind of event that will happen, within 6 months that will affect them. And then the last one here is telling them about an event that will likely happen in the future. So in one case scenario, you're saying like, hey, this mandate's going to be lifted in 6 months from now. The second case scenario is, hey, this mandate's going to be lifted 6 months from now. So what you're likely going to see happen is people are going to be less apt to buy insurance. So this is something that may happen versus something that will. And within what they know about, in the first case scenario, they know the current setup of their business, but they don't know that the event will occur until they met you. And they don't know that they have a problem due to that event that they need to solve for in the present. And then this last one here is they don't know that the event will likely occur, and they don't know that this authors in or issues in a potential threat to them. So again, this is all prognosing, meaning you're forecasting for your buyer things that they do not know. This is where you're going to win rapport with them. So, I see a lot of people in prospecting, they're like, well, why are my conversions so low? I'm like, you're pain selling only, pain prospecting. If the pain was big enough, then they would have inbounded, but it's not. So you're essentially leaving it up to luck. The people who do have a big enough pain but haven't inbounded yet. So this is a way, if you're telling people things they don't know, this is a way to drastically increase your pipeline and your conversion. The last one here is, how do I help them through prescription? So prescription, you can do a number of things. So again, how you're going to help them here within problem-centric selling is you're prescribing something that's going to solve the problems that they have, that your product or service solves for. So a doctor is their efficacy as a doctor is based on three things. Can they diagnose what's happening? Can they prognose what's going to happen to them if they don't resolve it? And can they prescribe something, not just prescribe something, but prescribe something that solves the problem? So if I went to a doctor and I had this condition and then they gave me, some type of medication and it didn't work, I wouldn't think very highly of the doctor. So I think we think in our minds that selling is a one-time thing. It's done and then it's over. Specifically within SaaS, if it's an annual contract, it ain't over until 5 years in. So once I prescribe them something, if it doesn't work, then I'll be certainly questioning my purchase next year. So prescribing, you can help them by prescribing something that solves for a negative problem, usually a symptom in the present. Number 2, prescribing a plan that solves for their neutral problem, the current goal that they're trying to achieve in the present. Number 3, prescribing a plan for a neutral problem that is solving for a future metric or a future goal. So in this second case scenario, a great example would be, a plan of how they can hit their current quota. This next one would be, they have a future increased quota that's going to happen in the future. So I need to give them a plan of how to exacerbate their quota attainment now so that they hit that in 3 months. And then the last one here is prescribing something that changes their current state in a way that helps them avoid potential threats. So I go into this very deeply in symptoms, pains, problems, and signs. But essentially, there are threat-based problems that people are solving for, and they're trying to avoid a potential threat that might happen to them. So in this case scenario, you're trying to prescribe something that will help that reality not come true. So what they do know is listed over here, but basically what they don't know is even if someone comes into you, for a problem that they know that they have and they were correct and the impact that they're going to have, that's going to have on them, what they don't know is how to solve for it. So prescribing is the way, to really hold the keys to their heart of how can I prescribe a product, service, and deployment plan of that product or service that will solve their inherent problem. And then the last two here, and here are some tips. The lime green ones are going to be tips. Prescribing something that solves their problem without creating a new one. This is big. So I'll give you an example, medical and business. The medical one being, I'm allergic to penicillin. If I had a condition and someone gave me a medication, it solved my problem, but but it includes penicillin, then I would break out in hives in random spots in my body for 15 minutes, and it goes away in that spot, and then enacts in another spot for 4 days straight, right? So that would create another problem for me. So prescribing something that doesn't create another problem. The last two here are prescribing something that solves an original problem that they had that they already tried to solve. So this is usually a high-risk scenario. They already tried to solve it with something else, and it didn't work. So this is prescribing something that actually diagnoses, and alleviates their problem. And then the last one here is prescribing something that solves for side effects that they're having from an original prescription, or prescribing something that solves their original problem but doesn't create a side effect. So again, if you go into signs, symptoms, problems, and pains, I go into all the different types of problems you can solve. Very, very lengthy. Or the 4 agendas of selling, I also go into it there. But essentially, the biggest tips I have here is that you want to give them a solution or a plan or your tools that solve for their current hell, but don't create a new one for them. So this is, I see this quite a bit in selling of like, yeah, it solved my problem, but it issued in a whole new one that now I'm just busy solving that one. So this is all hinged off of in prescription. Does it actually work? Does it solve for the problem that I'm looking to solve for? And does it not create new ones that I have to deal with? So I now want to go into part C of this. What do you need to know to help them? And then what are the types of questions that you can ask them to diagnose? So I know this is a long session, but if you need to take a break right now, I would pause the screen, go get a Diet Coke and come back. And we're going to go into the last two pieces here. But C is going to be, what do you need to know to actually help them? So before you even think about, I need to go into problem-centric selling, you need to know things about your buyer to be able to do this. I sound like a jerk for saying that, but it's kind of like saying, hey, to be a doctor and prescribe things, you're going to need to go to medical school first. So the things I would want to know about my buyer is what they're metriced on, common problems or challenges that they're running into, what's relevant to my buyer statically. So if you go into the written hub and download the 6 buckets of personalization, I go into static relevance, but it's, company segment, for instance, or industry vertical of knowing what's relevant to them within that. What's going on with my buyer in relationship to me. So, maybe they downloaded content, maybe they requested a demo but didn't actually schedule one. Maybe they watched a webinar of us, but any type of thing, event that happened with them in relationship to you. Number 5, what happened to my buyer not in relationship to me? So both of these, 4 and 5, if you go into the written hub under the Comprehensive Encyclopedia of Sales Plays, postbound and bridgebound, those categories are chock full of things that could be happening to your buyer. So postbound is in relationship to you, of like they're intertwining with your marketing team. What's going on with them not in relationship to you is something that they did in the market or the market did to them that has nothing to do with your company. So let's say they IPO'd or they received company funding or they just acquired another company. But these are things that's happening to them. And then the last one here is knowing your buyer for your buyer. So knowing personally what's going on with them. And I don't mean personally as in not professionally. I mean personally as in what are things that they're doing and saying within the professional realm that only they're doing or saying in specific. So 6 buckets of personalization is a great way to get to know this topic, very meaty topics. But these are all of the 6 things that I would want to know about my buyer. So if I don't know these about my buyer, I'm unable to problem-centric sell. So if you're getting a little overwhelmed and you're thinking like, okay, I sell into a CIO. I don't know what a CIO does. Yeah, this girl is talking about knowing her buyer, but she sells into sales. I would say, number 1, I don't just sell into sales. And number 2, I haven't had to sell. Haven't had the privilege of selling into sales the majority of my career. So I had to get to know very technical buyers. So CIO, CFO, HVAC technicians, plumbers, heating, lighting, cooling, etc. So I would say, number 1, your buyers are going to pivot for every company. But number 2, there is no better time to start than now. If you don't know your buyer, it's completely okay. Just Google search what they're KPI'd on. It'll take you about 15 minutes. I did it the other day for 6 buyers that I don't sell into. It took me 15 minutes. So I'd Google what are they metriced on and what are the common problems that they're running into. So these are the criteria that you need to know to be able to problem-centric sell. So how to go about this, again, we're going to hinge off of the things they weren't considering or that they don't know. That's where we're really going to build our expertise and not prove our credibility, but, establish some level of credibility with them. So again, I would read Gap Selling by Keenan. He goes in very, very deep on this topic. He's absolutely brilliant. Don't tell him I said that. Absolutely brilliant. This book is ahead of its time. So I would read this book. The 4 things in review that I'm helping them with is diagnosing a root cause for a problem that they already know they have, diagnosing a problem that they don't know that they have, prognosing an impact that they don't know will happen to them, and also help them by prescribing a solution that they didn't know what the solution was to a problem that they already knew that they had. So to do this, I would ask the quote unquote right questions. So we're going to go into all of the right questions that you can ask, and then we're going to close out for the day. So if you go into the 7 Steps to an Electric Cold Call, here are all the types of questions that I'm asking. Overview questions, situational current state, symptom questions, which are pain-based questions, not standalone. Problem-based questions, meaning do they have a problem? Can you ask a question in a way that will help them self-realize when they're answering that they have a problem? Sign questions, meaning questions that seem insignificant, irrelevant to them, but tell you that they have a problem that they didn't know that they had. Impact questions of, are there any current negative impacts? So you can understand what's going to happen to them that they know about and that they don't know about if they don't resolve the issue. Conditional future state questions. These are any kind of impact questions or future events that will happen to them. And what I really hinge in on here, different topic for a different time, is the prospect pith. Meaning, what is the true reason why they're in the room? People usually only have one. main driver in their head, but what is the pith of what they're after? So to do this, I want to go into the current state question. So Keenan talks a lot about in his book, The Current State. And what he means by that is their current way of doing things or way of operating, problems in their current state, things that they're running into, negative impacts that they're running to in the current state. But it means as is currently today, what are things that are happening to them? So he talks a lot about physical and literal questions, and these just mean objective facts and details about someone's current state. So understanding physical and literal questions will help you be able to diagnose, help you be able to prognose, help you be able to diagnose a problem that they didn't know that they have, understand the root cause of one that they did know that they have that's symptom related. So I essentially within selling, I'm all after physical and literal questions to understand what their current setup is so I can understand what the problem is that I'm solving for. So I'm going to go into a menu of all of the types of physical and literal questions that you can be after or that you would want to know. First, I wanted to go into some definitions. So I'm going to break this down for each one of these, and I think there's 6 in total. But I'm going to break this down into 3 different pieces that you'll need to know. So physical and literal questions according to the persona, meaning the person that you're selling into, their team or their department. Purview questions, purview department questions, which means if I'm selling into a marketer, the adjoining department or the sales department, what processes do they share between the two that impact the persona that I'm selling into? And then the last is going to be company. So this is for the company of that person. What are the physical and literal questions I could be after for that person's company? So all of these will help give you a picture of what the problem is. So again, this is an exhaustive menu of all the different elements that you could be after within physical and literal questions, meaning what about their situational setup would help you diagnose and understand what problem that they're running into. So we got persona, which is the person, team, or department. Purview department, which means the adjoining department to the persona, if they have overlying tech processes, etc., that impact the persona. And then from the company level, what about the company can you ask to help get to know what the problem is? So the first type of physical and literal questions are tools, process, and strategy. So a lot of words on this chart, but essentially it's going to break down to this. What questions about the tools that they have or their team has or department has can I ask? What tools do they share between that them and an adjoining department? And again, this is a menu of questions you could ask, not questions you have to ask. It's just, if I were a doctor, for instance, these are all the diagnosis questions I could hypothetically ask. But you need to be after your prospects have question fatigue. So you need to use them wisely of what are the 3 questions I could be after to help me diagnose the quickest. So purview questions regarding the tools. So these are shared tools between your persona and an adjoining department, and then tools across the company. Same for process. What process questions do they have? What process items do they have and processes do they have in place on that that person's using in specific, their team is using, or their department's using? I would then be after any kind of processes that joins them to the marketing team. So for instance, in my buyer persona, a lot of times I'm selling to an SDR or a sales team, and I want to know what the pass-through is, the qualification process when they're passing over a meeting to an account executive. What does it need to be qualified? You know, is there any churn there? You know, how many meetings are they having in between? Is there an SDR meeting where they're qualifying up front? So this is any kind of process that joins them. And then questions about the process that the company has is the last one here. And then strategy. So same exact thing. Strategy that the current persona has, their team has, or their department has. Strategy that involves them in an adjoining department. And then strategy that is for the company-wide. So this is the first 3 types of questions that you can be asked after that, again, is in their current situational, like their current state, all the things that are happening to them within their buyer, buyer persona that you know could be causing a problem. So always the goal here is to diagnose a problem, diagnose a root cause of a problem that they already know that they have, prognose an impact that will happen in the future, and then prescribe a solution. So these are the first 3 types of questions you can ask to know that. So, I mean, examples for me, just so I can make it more simple, so to speak, is examples for flip the script is I would say, what kind of sales engagement software are you using? If are you using an outreach, for instance, within the SDR buyer persona purview department tool would be, are you using Asana, to get, I know that you are putting webinars together to get people to follow up. Are you using Asana, in terms of the task step, because it's a shared tool. And then a company level tool could be, are you using Salesforce as a CRM, for instance? The process could be, can you tell me about the process that your team's using to import contacts into sales engagement, for instance? So I know if there's a problem in terms of a hiccup. Purview department process could be, can you tell me about the process, what the lead follow-up is process after someone requests a demo? And then for the company level, this could be, tell me about the process of your customer's buyer journey front to end. So this would be spanning across the entire company, but it would be a good question for me to know. And then for strategy, can you tell me about your outbound strategy? Can you tell me about the strategy that you have within your one-on-ones between AEs and SDRs for purview department? How do they co-hunt accounts together would be a purview department process or a strategy. And then company strategy would be, what is the TAM that you are after and why? Why do you think those buyers are essentially the ones that are going to buy more often? So those are just flip the script examples to give you a little bit ambit or direction. The second type of physical and literal question is going to be about people. So again, this is a menu. So if you're HR software, for instance, or, then these would be top of mind for me. But questions regarding the people in the personas team department or them in specific. Questions about the personas purview department. This is an adjacent department. And then questions regarding the people of the company overall. So there's a number of different variables in here. I'm not going to go through them all, but, head count on the team, hiring recommendations, any kind of growth, layoff, churn, key hires, open roles versus filled ones of maybe I have 10 open head count and that's contributing to the fact that I can't hit a team quota, for instance. But these are all around the people of that persona's department, team, or them in specific. The education level, do they know our product? Do they know our market? Do they, et cetera? Skill level of the people that are involved. But these are all questions that you can ask about the persona, their team, or department. Second is the same exact thing, but for the persona's purview department. So usually people are willing to talk more crap about an adjacent department versus their own. So they'll be like, yeah, marketing sucks. Their skill level's low. I get, crappy leads that come over. I think that they just don't get it. But these can be questions. Again, marketers, I love you. For any marketer that's out there, I do love you. Salespeople don't, but I do. I'm just kidding. So this is any questions about adjoining departments. And again, you're asking the questions that are helping you diagnose, prognose, and prescribe. So this is just the menu, but any kind of questions that would affect a problem that they would be having according to their purview department or one that they intertwine with a lot. And then the last one here is anything about the company. So company headcount, hiring reps, hypergrowth, layoffs, churn. So let's say, a good example for flip the script would be, I would want to know, for skill level in terms of their cold calls within the department or enablement. I put that in here, how many training courses have they been giving so far when it comes to cold calls or any kind of churn of have you seen any employee churn? SDR churn over the last 6 months. And that gives me a good marker of maybe there's no growth path, from there to, from an SDR to an AE. And so that could be a problem. Purview department could be, is there assess skill level? Is the team skill level for the marketing team or the sales team not very high? Do SDRs think that their meetings are not being quote unquote qualified, because the seller just didn't know how to sell it and didn't want to say that? So it's assess skill level. And then company, obviously, a great example would be headcount hypergrowth. So let's say that my company was, I think Uber back in the day, they had to hire 5,000 people overnight, and so how has that taxed, the companies in hypergrowth? And so, I might not get that much priority. And so how does that affect me within my buyer persona of like, maybe I have to hit a team goal, and I need to get more headcount in the door. But the reason that I can't do that is because everyone needs to get more headcount in the door. So again, these are any kinds of questions about the people within these 3 categories. Physical and literal questions for structure and overview. These are any kind of questions about an overview of the personas department. So the structure of it, the layout of it, the setup of it, of their team or their department. Same thing for the personas purview department, any kind of adjoining departments, and same thing for the company. So the biggest category for this is going to be company. But for structure and overview questions, I would want to know things like, for the persona, what's their role, responsibilities, the structure of their team, the training that their team has had, the budget that they've had to support. So any kind of elements in terms of hierarchy or support is going to be big here. So tenure of the department, responsibilities of the department, budget of the department, so on and so forth. So this is anything according to their team, department, or persona that essentially is structure or support related or overview related. Purview department, same type of thing. The hierarchy structure of the marketing team. What are the responsibilities of the marketing team? What are the joint responsibilities with my SDR team and that marketing team? What's the enablement of them, et cetera, and so forth. So I'll go into examples in a second, but this would be anything that essentially is adding to the problem or causing a problem in relation to the structure or overview of an adjoining department. And then the biggest one here is going to be company. So I want to know the structure and things about the company. This is going to be a very big category so that I can understand why is the problem happening within the org. So hierarchy structure, the company vertical, industry, is it public or private, funding round, evaluation, rev, market share, is it product-led growth, sales-led growth, or marketing-led growth? Different topic for a different time. Absolutely matters when it comes to, certainly to sales training, but how the company's set up overall. M&A, did they acquire other companies recently? Were they acquired recently? Any kind of growth, headquarters, locations, product, any kind of products that they're selling, features, benefits, etc. So this would help me. A great instance is within company. If I don't know that their market share is 20% and their competitors is 80%, then I don't know the impact of them staying as is in terms of selling skills. If I don't know that their headquarters or their locations are APAC focused, then I would maybe misdiagnose and say like, hey, well, your problem is your SDRs aren't researching enough. When the reality is that a lot of people in APAC aren't on LinkedIn. They view Facebook as a business platform. So again, I'm always going to triple asterisk mark that this is the whole menu of questions that you should be asking to diagnose a problem that they didn't know that they had, a root cause of a problem that they didn't know that they have, a prognosis and impact that they weren't aware of, and prescribe a solution to any of the above. So these are all the types of questions that you could do. I mean, I gave some for company examples, but persona examples would be, what is the responsibilities or maybe the responsibilities of this role in specific, meaning are SDRs, for example, tasked with closing meetings, or are they closing one business, or are they just tasked with opening the door? Are they tasked with following up on webinar leads from marketing, or is it just in terms of they're having to go outbound? But this is anything about the team or persona. And then purview department, a great example for flip the script. This would be any jointly shared responsibilities or responsibilities of the marketing team. Where does marketing stop and the SDR begins? So joint responsibilities could be following up on event leads, that would add to my diagnosis of maybe they have a lot of event leads and they're not hitting their KPI. I've seen this all the time. They're not hitting their KPI. They have 5,000 event leads, but because of the follow-up process, people are going outbound, even though they had 2,000 out of those 5,000 that were high marquee prospects that they could have called into that would have been easier. And then the last bucket of questions are going to be very metric related. So my friends and buddies always make the joke of, if you want to get me on the phone, which I'm not a phone person usually, but if you want to get me on the phone, bring up a KPI system and I'll pick up the call. So these last 3 categories are going to be very metric driven. The first thing I'd be after, and this is where I would start the conversation, full disclosure, is if someone thinks that they have a problem, then like it's usually going to have something to do with their metric. What are they metric to do? Sell more meetings, more MQLs. That's why I stress. You need to know their metrics. If I don't know that the lagging indicator of which baseball team was better is more runs being scored, how on earth am I going to coach someone on how to swing a bat? So I would want to know their metrics, that it doesn't matter if I'm playing for the Braves or the White Sox or the Red Sox or, heaven forbid, the Yankees. It doesn't matter. I want to win more games. That's my lagging indicator. So the first thing I would want to know is all of the metrics that my persona is metriced on. So these are going to pivot for some people. Some SDRs are booked on just initial meetings. Some of them are comped on qualified meetings. Some of them are, according to a certain criteria. Some of them are booked on activity metrics, heaven forbid. But this first bucket of questions is, what are they metriced on? What is my purview department metriced on? And what is my company metriced on overall? So this is just, what are the key performance indicators or KPIs that they are after that establishes a win? The second bucket here is going to be, what are the goals according to those? So now I know my SDRs are comped on booked meetings, let's say, or my sellers are comped on close one ACV. So the second would be, what is their goal that they've been issued? That it's 10 meetings, for instance. People, oddly enough, in selling, fight you on these. They'll fight you increasingly on they'll give you the metric, but they'll be less likely to give you their goal. If I constantly ask this, I'm like, okay, so what's the metric? And it's jarring to watch every time. They're like, oh, so it's qualified meetings and it's BS because it shouldn't be on this criteria. And I have to ask like 3 or 4 times, so what's your goal? Like physical raw goal. They're like, it's 10. So this is the goal that they have. So any kind of questions that their purview department has in terms of goals, their persona has in terms of goals, or their company has in terms of goals of like, we want to sell this amount so that we can, IPO or receive, go after some more funding. But these are any kinds of questions about the goals that they have that are leading, and lagging indicators. And then the last one, this is one they're going to fight you on the most, is their performance. It's hard. It's hard to admit. My face is blushing. When I've messed up in the past or whatever, I'm not hitting lagging indicator goal. It's hard to admit it. I can say that, marketing hasn't supported me or whatever it is, but performance is going to be hard. But this is very, very important that you tease this out. If you can't quantify when they say, and Keenan talks about this a lot, when they say, oh, we're not doing too well on quota, the first question in your head should not be, what's the cause of it? It should be, what the hell do you mean by not too well? What's the quota? What's the quota based on? What's the quota number? And then, what's the performance against it? Some people say not too well is 30%. Some people say not too well is 90%. It depends. And if you don't have that data, then you don't know for yourself how big the problem is. So I would be after, what are they metriced on? What are they calling a win for every buyer persona? Without exception, there is a quantitative metric that they are trying to achieve. So even if we're talking about is a warehouse safe? It's like, well, how many accidents have we had over the last X amount of days? And our goal is to go 60 days without accident. If I'm trying to measure who's the best soccer team, it's whoever scores the most goals. So I want to know what the metric is, what the goal is across these 3, and then what the performance is before I dig into any of the causes. So a lot of questions that I'll ask is they'll say our email outreach sucks, and I'm like, okay, so before we get into that, what do you metric on? They're like, so we're metric on 10 meetings a month. And they're like, we're performing at 12. And I'm like, then why do you think your email outreach sucks? You still might be correct. You might be booking all of that over cold call, but it's a good first start of what's hurting, so these are all the physical literal questions. So I want to review them just so everyone has them in their brain. You have persona questions about them, their department or their team, purview department questions, which is any kind of adjoining department and questions regarding that, and then company. And you have tool questions about their tool, tech stack, etc. process questions, anything about their processes, strategy questions, anything that they're including in their strategy, people questions, anything about the people within these 3 brackets, and then structure and overview questions, anything about the hierarchy, the setup, or the support of one of these 3. And then you have the wonderful, wonderful metric questions. What are they metriced on? How are they defining a win? What is their goal according to that metric? And what is their performance according to that metric is going to be very, very important. So these are all the questions that you can ask about someone's current situational, setup, like what Keenan would call a current state, so you can understand what is the problem that they're having. Can I diagnose that, diagnose the root cause of that? Can I diagnose a problem that they don't know that they have? Can I prognose an impact that's going to happen to them that they didn't know that they have? Or can I solve any of the above through prescription? So in summary, I know that product-centric selling feels easier. It is. You have a shorter amount of list to get to know. Feature-centric is the same thing. Benefit-centric, the same thing. And I know that pain-centric feels good too. But there is no expertise to that. And it manipulates my buyer. And it doesn't help them. So I know that problem-centric selling, it's tough. Like full disclosure, if you watch this entire thing, I would argue that you are a mendicant for pain. That you are after the right things if you watch this length of a webinar. And I know that it's tough to know your buyer. I know that it's tough to, get to know their common problems and common challenges and things that are happening to them. But what's tougher is not being able to help them, not being able to hit your quota, and not to be able to know that when you sold them something that will put them in a better place with problem-centric selling. So I know that it's tougher in the short term, but problem-centric selling is an incredible gift to your prospects, that you're talking to your potential buyers, and to yourself as a seller. Woo! So that was a doozy. Thank you so much for watching and for watching the entire way through. I had a lot of fun. If you like this session and you want to hear more, I have lots of more sessions on anything and everything sales if you just go to flipthescript.co, and everything is for free. And if you really like this session, you want to see some minor clips during the week, if you go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and give us a follow, and we put out all kinds of clips from everything tactical to anything process related about 3 times a week. But either way, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.